two sets of research. We conducted research over the summer in July, as Ken noted, and also last night because of the headline making news. We went into the field last night. So it's important to note that most of the information you're seeing here, number one, has not been released yet. So enjoy it. And number two is among Washington policy elites. So these are not normal people, right? These are okay. These are folks that are living in and around the Beltway, and they read Politico Pro, Roll Call, The Hill, you get it, The Post, Journal, CQ, all that kind of stuff. Only the stuff that hardcore political junkies in this area would read. We live in a bubble here, and their attitudes are somewhat more reflective of the attitudes maybe around Congress or the administration, and much less reflective of maybe the rank and file west of us. Okay. We're all familiar with the current situation, and I think what you're going to see here is there are many nuances in public opinion when it comes to trade. Some of the traditional partisan splits that you see with other issues don't exactly play out the way you see them on other topics. So let's break into this. First, we wanted to get a sense of how many people are actually following this topic right now. So this is polling from last night, flash polling from last night among policy elites here in town. What are they listening to? What are they paying attention to? Well, the hurricane and flooding is number one, about 60% saying they're following it very closely. Keep moving down to the right, and TPP agreement announced, 44% among Democrats, 42% among Republicans. So you can see they're following it, but not at the level of some other events. But still, 40% following it very closely is still pretty large. So they are following this topic. When we were polling on this earlier, the awareness and percent following it closely was much lower, so it's obviously spiked because it's in the news, it's in the newspaper. Now, there are a lot of other potential trading agreements in the offing, but the two they know about are TPP and TTIP, and the awareness on the others drops fairly substantially off from there, not surprising. I would love to do focus groups on some of these around town at some point. Now, let's look at support levels. This is something that Bruce and I have talked quite a bit about, and I want to make this point very clear at the outset. So there's sort of the official position of the parties, and there's the official, what we know in this room are sort of how the parties stack up, with Republicans generally more pro-trade deal than Democrats in this city officially. And our intellectual bases among the parties similar, right? So on the Republican side, the intellectual base of the party tends to still be very much pro free trade and trade deals. That's very true. But even among elites, and certainly among the general voters, that is not true. So the Republican Party has become much more populist, so their support of trade deals, and I say this as a former Republican pollster, the support of trade deals among voters, and even among some elites, is lower than you would expect because the parties have been shifting, and because Bill Clinton essentially reoriented the Democratic Party, at least the elite, towards trade in the 90s. So let's look at this for a second. Support for free trade, quote unquote, in general, high among Washington elites, both Democrat and Republican, 69% among Democrats, 72% among Republicans. So that's the sort of generic support for the concept of free trade, which is sort of baked into the cake of US public opinion at this point. But support for TTIP, 65% among Democrats, 59% among Republicans, and these are elite policy-focused Republicans around town. TPP, 70% among Democrats, 61% among Republicans, and then support for Trade Promotion Authority, 60% among Democrats, but 34% among Republicans. Now, part of that is a reflection of who is sitting in the White House at this moment, but part of it is also potentially a historical reversion to the norm of the Republican Party, which started out as a nationalistic protectionist party at the end of the Civil War. So what are the most effective messages? And this is all kudos to my staff because they were working on this late last night and actually early this morning when we were putting the slides together. We tested a number of messages, but the strongest closing message is strengthening alliances in Asia, supporting those alliances. So what's interesting here is policy elites understand the Asia pivot, and they see this as a part of the Asia pivot. So the president's done a very good job of the administration's done a very good job of positioning this as part of the Asia pivot, as part of supporting our strategic alliances. This is likely, I think, to be the closing argument around town, but it's a good one, and it tests very well. It tests, I know in other focus groups and discussions, especially with Republicans, the national security argument tests very well when it comes to trade deals. Now, do they think this is going to pass? Yeah, they do. So elites around town, they think it's going to pass. So there might be a lot of toing and froing and friction now, but they think it's going to pass. So 88% of Democrats think it passes, and 74% of Republicans think it's signed into law. But there's a lot of skepticism of the benefits. So take a look at the little American flag there. That's the American public and what they actually think about the benefits of trade in terms of jobs. A lot of skepticism in the general public. Now, among elites, a lot less skepticism, a lot more positive reactions to it. But you can also see the drop between Democratic support in terms of believing that this is going to be good for the economy and good for jobs versus Republican. At the elite level, you get a drop off. And that's some of the skepticism we see throughout the data, and I think Bruce will speak to in a minute. Both parties, if this passes, see it as a win for the president. Even the Republicans reluctantly agree it would be a win for the president. But I want to talk a little bit about the future of trade. There are really two splits in the data here. There's the distinction between what elites think about trade deals and what everybody else thinks about trade deals. So if you just get in the car, drive west 100 miles, different discussion, right? And that is the discussion between the elites on the left, who we've surveyed, and national adult data, who Pew has surveyed. You see that drop off there in perception of trade deals. The second split in the data is between Democrats and Republicans. Take NAFTA. So if you go back, Pew Research Center's done a lot of polling historically on NAFTA, the old NAFTA deal. That deal was never really fully sold to the American public. I mean, if you still survey people today, they're not really sold on the benefits of NAFTA. Let's be honest, okay? So go and look then by party, and these on the right, and you can see Democrats still believe that free trade agreements like NAFTA, policies of the WTO, they're more likely to say those policies are good than Republicans. And you see a big drop-off between 2009 and 2010. And I think part of that is because the Republican Party has become more populist on a number of issues. And this brings me to my final point, which is we have to understand the historical context here. The Republican Party was originally a very nationalistic and protectionist party at the end of the Civil War. And if you go out into red districts, you're likely to get a lot of that to this day. That has not necessarily translated back into Congress on this topic, but is worth taking a look at as we move forward. With that, I'll yield back to Bruce, right?